All right, let's get right into it. We're going to talk about a single legal case, one that started with just one middle school student, but ended up completely redrawing the lines between an individual and the government when it comes to public health. It's an incredible story about fairness, the limits of science, and a really stunning legal move.
And at the absolute core of this whole thing is this really powerful idea, the principle of a special sacrifice. The court was basically saying that if you take one for the team, like getting a vaccine for the good of the entire community, and something totally unforeseen happens, well, the community has a duty to have your back. You shouldn't have to carry that weight all by yourself.
And believe me, that principle was put to the ultimate test. We're talking about a grueling fight that lasted nearly a decade. This wasn't just about getting money. It was a battle that forced the entire legal system to look in the mirror and ask a really tough question. What does justice actually look like when science can't give us a black and white answer?
So to really wrap our heads around the massive legal ideas at play here, we have to start with the human story right at the center of it all. It all begins with one student's long battle. And this was an absolute marathon, not a sprint. Look at this timeline. It all kicks off in 2016. A student gets her second HPV shot, and soon after develops this awful, debilitating joint pain. The diagnosis, juvenile arthritis. Her family applies for compensation, and they're denied, so they sue. In 2019, they get a massive win. But a year later, bam, the Supreme Court overturns it. The case gets kicked back down, and then in a really gutsy move, the lower court rules for the student again in 2023. That set the stage for one last, historic showdown in 2025.
So, what was the argument that created this crazy legal roller coaster? Well, it all boiled down to one single question. How in the world do you prove a connection that science itself isn't even 100% sure about?
Okay, so the family's argument in that first trial was just super clear and honestly pretty compelling. First, the timing was tight, the symptoms popped up right after the shot. Second, she had absolutely no history of this stuff. Even her own doctors wrote down suspected vaccine side effect. But here was their knockout punch. They argued that the whole point of this law isn't to prove who's at fault, it's a social compensation system. So they said the burden of proof shouldn't be on the victim to prove a definite link. It should be on the government to prove there's no link.
And you know what? The lower court totally agreed. They established this crucial principle, saying that if a connection cannot be excluded, then that's good enough. When you're in that gray area of scientific uncertainty, the benefit of the doubt has to go to the person who made that special sacrifice for everyone else.
But this is where the story takes a wild turn. After losing that first round, the government didn't just appeal. Oh no. While the case was still making its way through the courts, they literally changed the rules of the game. And the shift was, wow, it was dramatic. The old rule, the one the student won her case under, was a pretty reasonable bar. Cannot be excluded. But this new rule, it set the bar way higher. It said that compensation will be flat out denied if big, broad, population-level studies didn't support a link. See what that does? It shifts the focus away from this one person's actual situation and puts all the weight on large-scale statistics. This created a massive legal headache. So which rules do you use? The ones that were on the books when the lawsuit started, or these brand new, much tougher ones that were passed right in the middle of the fight? It's a fundamental question about what lawyers call the judgment reference time. So when the case first got to the Supreme Court, the judges did what they usually do. They followed tradition. And tradition says you have to apply the law as it exists right now, at the moment you're making your decision. That meant the tough new rules were in play, and that's exactly why they overturned the student's first victory. It was a huge, devastating blow. But when the case finally made its way back to the Supreme Administrative Court for the final round, the judges came up with a truly creative and frankly absolutely brilliant solution to this whole mess. Okay, check this out. First, the court went back to square one. They said, hey, let's remember the whole point of the main law here. It's to compensate people for making special sacrifices. Simple. Then they pointed out a giant flaw in the government's new rule. They said relying only on big population studies is just wrong, and they even gave this logical mistake a name, using the whole to wrongly cover a specific part. This quote right here, it just nails the heart of their argument. The court was basically saying you can't just wave around a study that says, well, on average, this doesn't happen, and use that to completely dismiss the real-life suffering of an actual human being standing right in front of you. An individual is not just a number in a spreadsheet. And here is the absolute masterstroke. The court said that because this new rule was so deeply flawed, applying it would actually go against the very spirit of the law it came from. Not only that, they said it would be unconstitutional. It would be unfair discrimination.
So, in this incredible move, the court just refused to apply the new rule. They didn't even overturn their old precedent about using the current law. They just declared that this specific current law was so unjust, it was inapplicable here. Genius. So you can imagine, this decision wasn't just a win for one student and her family, it sent ripples, major shockwaves, through the entire legal and public health system. So why is this such a big deal? Well, for one, it sets a huge precedent. It's a warning shot to government agencies that you can't just move the goalposts mid-lawsuit if your new rules betray the whole point of the original law. It champions the individual story over impersonal statistics, and most importantly, it powerfully reinforces that constitutional promise that society has to take care of those who make a special sacrifice for the good of all. At the end of the day, this entire 9-year fight leaves us with this one profound question. In those gray areas of science where we just don't have perfect certainty, who should have to carry the risk? This landmark case gives us one very powerful answer. The burden of doubt shouldn't fall on the individual who suffers, but on the society that benefits.